The image appeared in my Facebook feed at 2:17 a.m., jolting me awake from my half-sleep scrolling. There was Jessica, my only daughter, posing on a pristine Maui beach with her arms wrapped around Victoria Patel, the woman who had told me to my face that I wasn't refined enough to be included in the wedding planning. The same Victoria who had supposedly been too ill to postpone their hasty ceremony. The same Victoria who had convinced my daughter that I was too emotionally unstable to attend her wedding 3 months ago. Yet there they were, sun-kissed and smiling beneath swaying palm trees in Hawaii, the exact destination I had secretly been saving toward for Jessica's honeymoon for the past 5 years. The caption read, "Best mother a girl could ask for. Blessed of family vacation." My stomach clenched as I stared at that hashtag. Best mother. When had I been replaced so completely? When had 24 years of bedtime stories, college tuition payments, and midnight emergency room visits been erased? I took a screenshot, though I'm not sure why. Perhaps as evidence that it had really happened, that I wasn't imagining this. Final betrayal. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on just 7 words. Glad to see Victoria made a miraculous recovery. Then I blocked them both, turned off my phone, and watched the sunrise alone from my kitchen window, wondering how my only child could cut me out of her life so completely, and why it had taken me so long to realize it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was 40 when Jessica was born, a late-in-life miracle after doctors had told me pregnancy wasn't possible. Her father, Mark, had already moved on by then, unwilling to disrupt his career plans for an unexpected baby. "You're keeping it? At your age?" he'd asked, as if our 8 years together meant nothing when faced with the inconvenience of parenthood. He signed away his rights before she was born, sending holiday cards for the first 3 years before disappearing completely. I never regretted my choice. One look at Jessica's tiny face, her perfect fingers gripping my thumb in the delivery room, and I knew I would move mountains for this child. What I didn't realize then was how completely I would lose myself in the process. I was an architect by training, working at a prestigious firm in downtown Mapleton. After Jessica arrived, I scaled back to part-time, then eventually shifted to the administrative side so I could have predictable hours. Less fulfilling, less creative, less pay, but it meant I could be there for every school play, every soccer game, every moment of her childhood. "You're sacrificing too much," my sister Karen would say during our Sunday phone calls. "Sarah, you need to keep something for yourself." "There will be time for that later," I always answered. "Jessica only gets one childhood. My career can wait." But the truth was, by the time Jessica left for college, my design skills were outdated, my professional contacts had moved on, and the industry had evolved beyond my reach. I had become irrevocably Jessica's mom, a role I embraced so completely that I barely remembered who Sarah Mitchell had been before. I never complained about the financial strain. When Jessica was accepted to Westridge University with only a partial scholarship, I remortgaged my modest home to cover the difference. When she wanted to study abroad in Barcelona for a semester, I picked up weekend shifts at a local bookstore. When her apartment security deposit and first month's rent were due after graduation, I quietly liquidated what remained of my retirement fund. "You can't keep bailing her out," Karen insisted over coffee one Sunday. "She's 22, Sarah. When will she learn to stand on her own?" "She's building her career in marketing," I defended. "Entry-level jobs barely cover ramen noodles these days. It's different than when we started out." Karen gave me that look, part pity, part exasperation. "And what about your future? Your retirement is practically gone." I sipped my coffee and changed the subject. There was no point arguing when I'd already made my choice. Jessica met Ryan Patel at a charity gala for the marketing firm, where she'd finally landed a junior position. He was handsome, ambitious, and came from the kind of family that had generational wealth. the kind that didn't discuss money because they'd always had it. Our backgrounds couldn't have been more different. The first time Jessica brought him to Sunday dinner, I noticed how she watched him carefully, modulating her opinions based on his reactions. The independent, outspoken daughter I'd raised seemed subdued, anxious to please. "Ryan thinks I should focus on digital marketing," she told me as we cleared the plates. "He says my creative concepts are good but not practical enough for today's market." "And what do you think?" I asked, passing her a dish to dry. She looked startled, as if the question hadn't occurred to her. "Well, he knows the industry better than I do. His family knows everyone who matters." I bit my tongue and nodded, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The daughter who once declared she would revolutionize advertising with authentic female voices was now parroting her boyfriend's safe, conventional wisdom. The engagement came 9 months later, announced via an Instagram post of Jessica's hand sporting a diamond that must have cost more than my annual salary. She called an hour after posting it, breathless with excitement. "Mom, I'm engaged." Ryan proposed on the rooftop of the Elevation Hotel. It was perfect. His mother helped pick out the ring, 3 carats, princess cut with baguettes on the band. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed, my heart racing with a confusing mix of happiness and dread. "I'm so happy for you." "We're thinking about the Peninsula Resort for the wedding. Victoria says she can pull some strings to get us in. They're usually booked 2 years in advance." The Peninsula. My stomach dropped. Jessica had been dreaming of a wedding there since she was 16, when we'd driven past and seen a bride on the waterfront terrace. I'd hinted for years that I was saving for her dream wedding, though the truth was I'd barely managed to set aside $5,000, nowhere near enough for the Peninsula's $60,000 minimum. "That sounds perfect," I said, my voice tight with forced enthusiasm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced my kitchen, calculator in hand, running impossible numbers. My home equity was nearly tapped out. My credit cards were already strained. My retirement account was a shadow of what it should have been at my age. But the thought of Jessica's face if she secured her dream venue, that would be priceless. The next morning, I called Thomas Grayson, the managing director at Horizon Financial, where I'd worked for 15 years. "I need more clients, Thomas. As many as you can give me." "Sarah, you're already handling more accounts than anyone in the firm," he replied, concern evident in his voice. "What's going on?" "Jessica's getting married. I want to help with the wedding." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "The Wallace portfolio just came in. It's substantial but demanding." "I'll take it," I said without hesitation. "Sarah," his voice softened, "I've known you since Jessica was in middle school. You've always put her first. Maybe it's time Patels contributed their share. From what you've told me, they're not exactly hurting for money." I ignored his concern. "I'll make it work, Thomas. I always do." 3 days later, I drove to the Peninsula Resort. The property was even more breathtaking than I remembered. Manicured gardens leading to a pristine private beach, a grand ballroom with chandeliers that caught the light like diamonds, and a bridal suite that belonged in a fairy tale. The events manager, Stephanie Clark, greeted me with the practiced warmth of someone used to dealing with wealthy clients. "The Patel family mentioned you might be reaching out," she said, leading me to a plush office overlooking the water. "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "My daughter Jessica has her heart set on the Peninsula." Stephanie nodded sympathetically. "We're fully booked for the next 2 years, but Mrs. Patel indicated that her husband's connections might warrant special consideration." I understood immediately what she wasn't saying. Money talked at places like the Peninsula. "What would it take to secure a date 6 months from now?" I asked directly. "Our premium package begins at $85,000, she replied smoothly, "with a non-refundable deposit of $30,000. The figure knocked the wind from me. It was more than I made in a year at Horizon Financial, but the image of Jessica's face when she realized her dream venue was secured. "I'll need to think about it," I said, accepting the glossy brochure Stephanie offered. That night, I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, staring at the brochure and my dwindling savings account. I had $7,200 in savings, $12,000 available across 3 credit cards, and a life insurance policy I could partially cash out for another $15,000. It would be financially reckless. It would delay my retirement by a decade at least. I wrote the check the next morning. When I called Stephanie to arrange the deposit delivery, her tone changed slightly when I mentioned my name rather than the Patels. "Oh, Ms. Mitchell, I assumed the deposit would be coming from Mr. Patel." "It's a gift," I explained, "for my daughter, but I'd appreciate if you didn't mention my involvement just yet. I want it to be a surprise." "Of course," she replied with professional discretion. "We understand completely." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I handed over the check that represented what remained of my financial security, a weight lifted from my shoulders. For once, I would be the hero in Jessica's story. Not Ryan, not Victoria Patel with her connections and society friends, but me, Sarah Mitchell, the mother who had sacrificed everything to make her daughter's dreams come true. What I didn't realize then was that my grand gesture was about to become the catalyst for the most painful chapter of our relationship. The wedding planning began immediately, with Victoria creating a group chat that included herself, Ryan, Jessica, and me. Within days, it became apparent that Victoria considered herself the primary decision-maker, with my input treated as an inconvenient afterthought. "I've arranged a tasting with Chef Marcel for next Tuesday," Victoria messaged. "His Mediterranean menu would be divine for a spring wedding." "Mom, can you make it?" Jessica texted. Before I could respond, Victoria added, "Let's keep the tasting small, darling. Too many opinions can be overwhelming. Why don't you, Ryan, and I go, and we can fill your mother in afterward?" I stared at my phone, a familiar ache spreading through my chest. This became a pattern over the following weeks. For dress shopping. "Sarah, the boutique is quite intimate, and Jessica's college roommate is already joining as maid of honor." For florist appointment. "We've narrowed down the options already. No need for Sarah to take time off work." For venue walkthrough. "Wonderful news! We've secured the peninsula through Anish's business connections." I bit my tongue when I read that last message, resisting the urge to point out that the peninsula had been secured through my bank account, not Anish's social network. But I remained silent, telling myself this was Jessica's special time and I wouldn't create tension that might spoil it for her. The tension rose nonetheless when discussion turned to the guest list. Victoria had submitted names of over 120 people. Business associates, social connections, distant relatives, people Jessica had never met. "Don't you think we should prioritize friends and family who actually know Jessica?" I ventured during one of the rare planning sessions where I was included. Victoria's smile remained fixed, her eyes cold. "Sarah, a wedding of this caliber is as much about social connections as celebration. Ryan's family has a certain position in the community to maintain." "But Mom," Jessica interrupted, her voice tight. "Victoria knows what she's doing. These people are going to be part of my life now." I fell silent, pushing my salad around my plate. When had my fiercely independent daughter started valuing social standing over authentic relationships? And when had she started calling me Mom in that clipped, dismissive tone that made me feel like an inconvenience rather than a parent? The final blow came 5 weeks before the wedding. Jessica asked me to meet her at the Copper Kettle, our favorite cafe since her high school days. I arrived early, ordering her usual caramel latte and finding a quiet corner table. When Jessica walked in, I knew immediately something was wrong. Her shoulders were tense, her smile strained. Everything okay, sweetheart? I asked as she slid into the seat across from me. She wrapped her hands around the mug I'd placed in front of her, avoiding my eyes. Mom, we need to talk about the wedding. My heart stuttered. Is something wrong with the venue? The date? No, nothing like that, she said quickly. It's about the arrangements. What arrangements? Victoria thinks, she started, then seemed to catch herself. We think it would be better if you attended as a regular guest rather than being announced as mother of the bride. I felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath me. What? It's just that Ryan's family is very traditional, with no father. To walk me down the aisle, Anish will be doing it. Victoria thinks highlighting you during the reception would create an awkward dynamic, especially with so many of their colleagues attending. Jessica, I said slowly, fighting to keep my voice steady. Your father hasn't been in your life for 24 years. He didn't put you through college. He didn't hold your hand through every triumph and heartbreak. I did. I'm your parent. Your only real parent. That's not fair, she snapped, her eyes flashing. Dad sends birthday cards. I couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. Birthday cards? That's your standard for parenting? This isn't about Dad, she said defensively. It's about creating the right impression for Ryan's family and their circle. Victoria thinks. Victoria believes, I interrupted, unable to contain my frustration any longer. When did Victoria Patel become the authority on your life, Jessica? On our family? Her cheeks flushed. She's just trying to help make my wedding perfect. And I'm not. The hurt in my voice was unmistakable. Jessica, I've spent my entire adult life trying to give you everything you needed, everything you wanted. I worked 60-hour weeks to put you through Westridge. I've supported every dream, every ambition, even when it meant putting my own life on hold. Here we go, she muttered, rolling her eyes. The martyr speech. Her words cut deep, deeper than she could possibly know. Is that what you think of me? That I'm playing martyr by reminding you of our relationship, our history? Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be, she sighed. It's one day, one tradition. Can't you just go along with it for me? One day that symbolizes the erasure of 24 years, I said quietly. One tradition that relegates me to the background of your life, as if all those years of sacrifice meant nothing. Jessica's expression hardened. If you're going to make my wedding about you and your feelings, then maybe... She trailed off, but her unspoken words hung in the air between us. Maybe what? I prompted, a cold dread settling in my stomach. She met my eyes, and for a second, I saw uncertainty flicker there before being replaced by resolve. Maybe it would be better if you didn't come at all. The world seemed to stop. You don't mean that. I do, she said, her voice gaining strength. Mom, I think it's best if you don't come to the wedding. Victoria thinks your presence would cause unnecessary tension, and honestly, I agree with her. I sat in stunned silence, the chatter of the copper kettle fading to a distant hum. My daughter, my only child, the person I had centered my entire life around, was banning me from her wedding, not because of any terrible thing I had done, but because I didn't fit the image Victoria Patel wanted to project. Jessica, I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you have any idea how much that would hurt me? She had the grace to look uncomfortable, but her resolve didn't waver. It's my wedding day, Mom. It should be exactly how I want it. How we want it. We. Not Jessica and me. Jessica and the Patels. In that moment, I realized I had lost her. Not suddenly, but gradually over months of planning and years of her seeking approval from people who valued status over substance. See, I said, gathering my purse. My hands were trembling. If that's truly what you want, I won't attend. Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by a flicker of guilt. "Thank you for understanding, Mom. I promise we'll celebrate together, another time." I stood up, feeling suddenly old and very tired. "Enjoy your perfect day, Jessica. I hope it's everything you and Victoria have planned." As I walked out of the copper kettle, tears blurring my vision, I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done weeks earlier. I called the Peninsula Resort. "This is Sarah Mitchell," I said when Stephanie Clark answered. "I need to cancel a wedding booking." I sat in my car outside the Peninsula Resort for nearly an hour after making the call, rain drumming against the windshield in perfect harmony with the tears streaming down my face. Stephanie Clark had been professionally sympathetic when I explained the situation. "Ms. Mitchell, I can process the cancellation, but I should remind you that the deposit is non-refundable," she'd said, her voice gentler than during our previous interactions. "I'm aware," I'd replied, my voice hollow. $30,000 gone in an instant, the equivalent of 2 years of mortgage payments, my entire emergency fund and then some. All of it vanished with a single phone call. But what was money compared to the realization that I'd become irrelevant in my own daughter's life? That after 24 years of putting her needs first, I'd been discarded so easily, deemed an embarrassment by a woman who'd known Jessica for barely 10 months. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "How did coffee with Jessica go?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain to my sister that my only child had just severed our relationship as casually as declining an unwanted appetizer at a restaurant? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the numbness had given way to a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. The modest colonial house that had been our home since Jessica was in elementary school suddenly felt like a museum of memories that no longer mattered. Photos of her lined the hallway, gap-toothed grins in elementary school, awkward teenage years with braces, graduation caps, and wide, hopeful smiles. I'd given up everything for those smiles. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, reaching for the bottle of Cabernet I kept for special occasions. This wasn't a celebration, but it certainly felt momentous. The day I finally understood that the life I'd built around my daughter's happiness had been a house of cards, ready to collapse at the first strong wind. 2 glasses in, my phone rang. It was Thomas Grayson. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled me to answer. "Sarah, are you all right? You missed the Wallace meeting this afternoon." The meeting. In the shock of Jessica's rejection, I'd completely forgotten about the new client. Presentation I'd spent weeks preparing for. "Thomas, I'm so sorry. Something came up." He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I've known you for 15 years. You've never missed a client meeting, not even when you had that terrible flu 3 years ago and could barely stand. What's going on?" And just like that, the dam broke. I told him everything. The secret venue payment, Victoria Patel's systematic exclusion of me from wedding planning, and finally Jessica's devastating request that I not attend at all. The words tumbled out between sobs that I couldn't control, years of suppressed hurt finding release. "So I canceled it," I finished, my voice ragged. "I canceled the venue booking." "Good for you," Thomas said firmly, surprising me. "It's about time you stood up for yourself, Sarah." "But I've lost her," I whispered. "My only child." "You didn't lose her today," he said gently. "From what you've told me, this has been happening for months, years maybe. You just finally acknowledged it." His words stung with their truth. I'd been watching Jessica slip away since she met Ryan. Each phone call becoming shorter, each visit home more rushed. I'd told myself it was natural. She was building her own life, establishing her career. But deep down, I'd known something fundamental was changing. The daughter who once called me for advice on everything from career moves to relationship troubles now consulted Victoria Patel instead, adopting her values, her preferences, even her dismissive tone. What do I do now? I asked, more to myself than to Thomas. Now? He said firmly. You start living for Sarah Mitchell. The next morning brought the first explosive consequence of my decision. My phone woke me at 6:22 a.m., Jessica's name flashing on the screen. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Perhaps she'd reconsidered. Perhaps she'd realized the enormity of what she'd done. I answered, my voice still rough with sleep. Jessica? What the hell did you do? Her voice was sharp, strident with anger. The hope withered as quickly as it had bloomed. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Mom. The Peninsula Resort called. They said you canceled our wedding booking. Why would you do something so vindictive? I sat up in bed, pushing hair from my face. Vindictive? Jessica, you banned me from attending. What did you expect me to do? What are you talking about? What does you not coming have to do with canceling our venue? I closed my eyes, realization dawning. They didn't tell you, did they? Victoria and her connections didn't secure that venue. I did. I paid the $30,000 deposit, every penny of it. Silence stretched between us, heavy with shock. That's not possible, she finally stammered. Victoria lied, I cut in, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. I've paid for everything in your life, Jessica. Your education, your rent when you couldn't make it in the city, and yes, your dream wedding venue. The venue you've now lost because you decided I wasn't good enough to attend. You paid for the Peninsula. Her voice had lost its edge, confusion replacing anger. Why didn't you tell me? Would it have made a difference? I asked quietly. Or would you still have chosen Victoria's approval over my feelings? More silence, then in a smaller voice. We can fix this, right? You can call them back. Explain it was a misunderstanding. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Just concern for the venue, for the perfect day that was slipping away. I felt something harden inside me, a protective shell forming around my wounded heart. No, Jessica, I can't fix this. The deposit is non-refundable, and they've already booked another wedding for your date. But the invitations are already out. Everyone is expecting the Peninsula. Mom, you have to do something. I already did something, I replied, my voice cool and distant. I spent 24 years putting you first. I worked myself to exhaustion to give you opportunities I never had. I emptied my savings to book your dream venue, and in return, you decided I didn't deserve to see you. Walk down the aisle. There's nothing left for me to do. So that's it? Her voice cracked. You're punishing me because I hurt your feelings? No, Jessica. I'm finally recognizing that I deserve better than to be treated as an afterthought by my own daughter. If you and the Patel family want a perfect wedding at the Peninsula Resort, then let them pay for it. They can't, she cried, panic edging into her voice. Ryan's parents are counting on us to handle the venue. They're already paying for the honeymoon in... I cut her off. That's not my problem anymore. You made your choice, Jessica. Now you get to live with the consequences. I ended the call before she could respond, my hands trembling but my resolve firm. Within minutes, the phone began ringing again. Jessica calling back, then Ryan. Then numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed belonged to members of the Patel family. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. For the first time in over 2 decades, I called in sick to work. I needed time to process, to think, to breathe in a life that suddenly had no center. I made coffee and walked through my quiet house, really seeing it for perhaps the first time in years. The faded curtains that needed replacing, the dated wallpaper in the hallway, the creaking step on the staircase I'd been meaning to fix. I'd put everything off, channeling every spare dollar into Jessica's future. By mid-morning, a knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I peered through the peephole to see Victoria Patel standing on my porch, her Mercedes gleaming in my driveway. I considered not answering, but a strange calm had settled over me. I was done hiding, done acquiescing, done making myself small to accommodate others. I opened the door, saying nothing, simply waiting for her to speak. Victoria wore an expression that attempted concern but couldn't quite hide her condescension. "Sarah," she began, "we need to talk about this situation." "Please come in," I said, stepping aside with exaggerated politeness. She entered my home like someone visiting a slightly distasteful museum, her eyes flicking over my modest furnishings. I led her to the living room and gestured to the sofa, but remained standing myself. "Sarah, I understand you're upset about the wedding arrangements," she began, smoothing her expensive slacks. "But canceling the venue is simply unacceptable. Do you have any idea how this makes our families look? The embarrassment Jessica and Ryan are facing?" "Funny," I replied. I was just thinking about embarrassment. The kind a mother feels when her daughter tells her she's not welcome at her wedding. Victoria had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable before rallying. "These situations are delicate. We were trying to create a certain atmosphere, a cohesive family narrative. By erasing me from it," I finished for her. "No one was erasing you," she said, her tone patronizing. "We were simply curating the event for optimal elegance." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Optimal elegance? Is that what you call cutting out the woman who raised Jessica single-handedly? The woman who worked 60-hour weeks to put her through an Ivy League education? The woman who paid for the very venue you're now upset about losing? Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Let's be clear, Sarah. You chose to make that payment, without consulting anyone. No one asked you to do that. Just like no one asked me to raise my daughter after her father abandoned us." I shook my head. "You're right, Victoria. No one asked. I did it because that's what love looks like. Showing up, sacrificing, giving without being asked. But I finally realized that love shouldn't be a one-way street." Victoria crossed her legs, her demeanor shifting to business-like efficiency. "Let's put feelings aside and be practical. What will it take to fix this? Is it about money? Because I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." The casual dismissal of my feelings as irrelevant, the implication that my pain could be bought off. It crystallized everything wrong with the dynamic that had been building since Jessica met Ryan. "It was never about money," I said quietly. "It was about respect, recognition, basic human decency. But you wouldn't understand that, would you, Victoria? Because in your world, people like me are just props to be arranged or removed as needed." She stood, clearly done with the conversation. "I see we're not going to reach a reasonable solution today. But understand this, Sarah. Actions have consequences. Jessica is devastated, and this vindictive behavior will only push her further away." "She was already gone," I said, the truth of it settling heavily in my chest. "You made sure of that." Victoria moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "If you change your mind, if you decide you want to repair this relationship, you know how to reach us." After she left, I sank onto the sofa, exhaustion washing over me. My phone buzzed with a text from Karen. "Jessica just called me in hysterics. What's going on?" I texted back, "Can you come over? I need someone on my side right now." 30 minutes later, Karen was at my door with a bottle of wine and a fierce protective expression. I told her everything, watching her face shift from confusion to outrage as the story unfolded. "They told you not to come to the wedding?" she repeated incredulously. "After everything you've done? And now they're angry because you canceled the venue you paid for?" I nodded, oddly comforted by her indignation. "Am I wrong, Karen? Am I being petty or vindictive like they're saying?" "Absolutely not," she declared, pouring us each a generous glass of wine. "Sarah, you've spent your entire adult life being a doormat for that girl. You've given up your own dreams, your retirement security, everything. And this is how she repays you? By letting some society climber convince her you're not good enough to be acknowledged as her mother? Hearing Karen say it so bluntly was both painful and liberating. I'd been so consumed with self-doubt, so worried about my own reaction that I hadn't fully processed the magnitude of Jessica's betrayal. "Jessica called you?" I asked, taking a sip of wine. Karen nodded grimly, crying about how you'd ruined everything, how she might have to cancel the wedding, how embarrassed she was. Not one word about how she'd hurt you. Not one acknowledgement that banning her own mother from her wedding was cruel and unusual punishment. She said I was punishing her for hurting my feelings, I said, staring into my wine glass. Like my feelings were trivial, an inconvenience to her perfect day. "And that right there," Karen said, pointing at me with her free hand, "is the problem. Your feelings have always been secondary to hers. You've taught her that your job is to give and her job is to take. And now she's shocked that you've finally drawn a line." I felt tears welling again. I always thought I was doing the right thing, being selfless, putting her needs first. Isn't that what a good mother does? Karen set down her glass and took my hand. A good mother teaches her child to be considerate, grateful, and kind. You did everything for Jessica except require her to think about someone besides herself. Her words were harsh but rang with uncomfortable truth. Had I enabled this? Had my constant sacrifice, my willingness to put myself last, contributed to Jessica's ability to discard me so easily? "I don't know who she is anymore, Karen," I whispered. "The Jessica I raised would never have treated anyone this way, let alone her own mother." "People show you who they are when it costs them something," Karen said softly. "When it was easy to love you, when you were solving her problems, paying her bills, supporting her dreams, Jessica was happy to have you around. But the minute your presence became inconvenient to her social climbing, you became expendable." I winced at her bluntness, but couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. "So what do I do now?" "Now," Karen said, refilling our glasses, "you start rebuilding your life without Jessica at the center of it. You focus on Sarah, what she needs, what she wants, what will make her happy. And if Jessica ever decides to grow up and recognize what she's thrown away, you can decide then whether to let her back in." That night after Karen left, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, doing something I hadn't done in decades, making a list of my own dreams, my own goals. What did I want for the years ahead? Who was Sarah Mitchell when she wasn't defined by motherhood? The list started slowly. Practical things like repainting the living room, fixing the creaky stair, updating my wardrobe. But as I continued writing, deeper desires emerged. Travel to Europe, take pottery classes, hike the Appalachian Trail, move to a cabin in the mountains, retire early. I looked at the final item, circling it with my pen. Early retirement had seemed impossible just days ago when I was still mentally setting aside funds for Jessica's needs. But now, if I cut back on expenses, took on a few more clients in the short term, and most importantly, stopped functioning as Jessica's financial safety net, it might be possible within 7 years. For the first time since the confrontation at the Copper Kettle, I felt a flutter of something like hope. There was life after Jessica. There was the possibility of joy that didn't revolve around her accomplishments, her happiness, her needs. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and drove to Horizon Financial, determined to reclaim some part of my identity beyond Jessica's mom. Thomas looked up in surprise when I knocked on his office door. "Sarah, I thought you'd take a few days. After yesterday." "I need to work," I said simply, settling into the chair across from his desk. "In fact, I need more work." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The Wallace account is still available if you want it." "I do, and any others you can send my way." Thomas leaned back in his chair. You're serious about this? Completely. I have 7 years until I can retire if I increase my income by 20%. I pulled out the spreadsheet I'd created late last night after finishing my wine with Karen. I've run the numbers. It's tight but doable if I'm focused. He took the spreadsheet, scanning it with professional thoroughness. This is ambitious, Sarah, but if anyone can do it, you can. He paused, setting down the paper. What about Jessica? The wedding? Jessica has made her choices. I'm making mine. Thomas nodded, respect evident in his eyes. All right then, let's talk about how we expand your client portfolio. By the end of the day, I'd taken on 2 new major accounts and scheduled meetings with 3 potential clients for the following week. The work would be demanding, the hours long. But for the first time in my adult life, every minute I spent at the office would be an investment in my future, not Jessica's. As I drove home, my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. An unfamiliar number with the city's area code. I answered cautiously. Ms. Mitchell, this is Diane Reynolds from the Mapleton Community Art Center. Your sister Karen mentioned you might be interested in our adult pottery classes. I almost laughed at Karen's swift intervention. Yes, I am, I found myself saying. When do they meet? We have a Thursday evening class that just started last week. There's still room if you'd like to join. Thursday evenings had been my standing phone call with Jessica since she moved to the city, a tradition that had dwindled over recent months as she became increasingly busy with Ryan and his family. I felt a moment's hesitation, then pushed it aside. Thursday evenings would be perfect, I said. That night, I moved methodically through my house, gathering items for a donation box. Jessica's high school yearbooks, the stuffed animals she'd insisted I keep for her future children. The photos that had dominated every surface, chronicling her life from infancy to adulthood. I didn't remove them all. I wasn't ready for that level of severance, but I curated them, making space for other aspects of life to exist in my home. As I worked, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Jessica, each more desperate than the last. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. Ryan's parents are furious. They're blaming me for the venue disaster. Victoria says we might be able to get another date at the peninsula if you'll reconsider. I read each one without responding, the protective shell around my heart growing stronger with each attempt to manipulate me back into my familiar role. The fixer, the funder, the self-sacrificing mother. The last message came just before midnight. Fine, if that's how you want it. We've booked the Grand Hotel instead. Not that you care. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed a response before I could second-guess myself. I'm glad. You found a solution. I wish you every happiness on your wedding day. Then I turned off my phone, climbed into bed, and slept more soundly than I had in months. The following weeks brought a strange new rhythm to my life. Days filled with client meetings and financial planning, evenings spent at pottery class, where I discovered I had a natural affinity for the wheel, or repainting my living room in a warm terracotta that made me smile every time I walked through the door. Weekends hiking local trails with Karen or exploring small towns within driving distance. Adventures I'd always postponed because Jessica might call needing something. I began to recognize myself again in small ways. The woman who once dreamed of designing sustainable housing. The woman who loved the mountains. The woman who had interests and opinions and needs of her own. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I received a formal wedding invitation in the mail. The heavy cream envelope addressed in Jessica's elegant handwriting. Inside, a tasteful card announced the nuptials of Jessica Mitchell and Ryan Patel at the Grand Hotel, now only 4 weeks away. A handwritten note was tucked inside. Mom, I hope you'll reconsider and attend. It wouldn't be the same without you there. Love, Jessica. No apology, no acknowledgement of how she'd hurt me. just the expectation that I would fall back into line now that she'd deigned to include me. I set the invitation on my mantle and didn't respond. 2 days later, Ryan appeared on my doorstep as I was preparing to leave for work. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his handsome face serious. "May I speak with you for a moment?" I hesitated, then gestured for him to enter. I had nothing against Ryan personally. He seemed like a decent young man caught between strong-willed women, his mother, my daughter, and now me. "I'll be direct," he said once we were seated in my newly painted living room. "Jessica is devastated that you're not coming to the wedding." "Jessica specifically told me not to come," I reminded him gently, "at her mother's suggestion." Ryan had the grace to look uncomfortable. "My mother can be difficult. She has very specific ideas about how things should be done, but I've spoken with her, and she understands now that excluding you was inappropriate." "Does she?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Or does she simply recognize that having the mother of the bride refuse to attend creates uncomfortable questions from your social circle?" He flushed slightly. "Mrs. Mitchell." "Sarah, please." "Sarah," he amended. "Whatever my mother's motivations, the important thing is that Jessica wants you there. She misses you." I studied him carefully. "Has she told you why I canceled the venue?" "She said you had put down the deposit as a surprise, and when you argued about the wedding arrangements, you canceled it out of anger." Of course she had framed it that way. "That's not entirely accurate," I said carefully. "Jessica told me explicitly that I wasn't welcome at the wedding because my presence would cause unnecessary tension. Only after I canceled the venue, which seemed reasonable given I wasn't allowed to attend, did she suddenly want to reconcile." Ryan looked genuinely surprised. "She said that? That you weren't welcome?" "Those were her exact words," I confirmed. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "I didn't know. She didn't tell me that part. There's a lot Jessica doesn't tell the people in her life when it doesn't serve her narrative," I said, surprised by my own candor. "It's a pattern that's become increasingly clear to me over the past few years." Ryan glanced at his watch, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of our conversation. "Will you at least think about coming to the wedding? For Jessica's sake?" I rose, indicating our time was up. "I'll consider it, Ryan. But I need you to understand something. My relationship with Jessica isn't going to return to what it was. Too much has happened. Too much has been revealed about both of us. If I attend your wedding, it will be on my terms, not Victoria's, and not even Jessica's." He nodded, extending his hand. "That's fair. Thank you for hearing me out." After he left, I called Karen. Ryan just stopped by, asking me to reconsider attending the wedding. And I could hear the protective skepticism in her voice. And I told him I'd think about it. Karen sighed. "Sarah, be careful. They hurt you badly. They'll do it again if you let them." "I know," I said quietly. "But I'm different now. Stronger. Clearer about my boundaries." "Just promise me you won't write another check or bail them out of this mess." "I promise," I said firmly. "Those days are over." That evening at pottery class, I found myself forming a delicate vase on the wheel, my hands steady as they shaped the spinning clay. Diane Reynolds, the instructor, paused behind me, watching with approval. "You have a natural touch, Sarah. You're creating something beautiful there." I looked down at the emerging form, surprised by what my hands had produced. "I guess I am." "Sometimes," she said wisely, "we don't recognize our own capabilities until circumstances force us to try." As I drove home later, clay dust still under my fingernails, I reflected on her words. In losing Jessica, or rather, in losing the illusion of the relationship I thought we had, I was finding parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across my front yard. A familiar car was parked at the curb, Jessica's blue Civic. My daughter sat on the front steps, hugging her knees to her chest like she used to do as a teenager when she was upset. My heart stuttered at the sight of her, maternal instinct warring. With my newfound self-protection, I took a deep breath, centered myself in the strength I'd been building, and stepped out of the car to face whatever came next. Jessica stood as I approached, her face pale in the fading light. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than I remembered. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "Jessica," I replied, neither warm nor cold, simply acknowledging her presence as I moved past her to unlock my front door. "You should have called first. You weren't answering my texts." There was an accusatory note in her voice that once would have triggered immediate guilt. Now it just reinforced my resolve. "I've been busy," I said, pushing the door open and turning to face her. "Did you need something specific, or is this a social call?" She blinked, clearly thrown by my directness. The old Sarah would have immediately welcomed her in, offered comfort, asked what was wrong. The new Sarah waited, keys still in hand, neither inviting her in nor sending her away. "Can we talk?" she finally asked. "Please?" I studied her for a moment, then nodded and gestured for her to enter. Inside, I set my pottery class tote by the door and moved to the kitchen, filling the electric kettle without asking if she wanted tea. It was a habit, making tea for difficult conversations, one of the few mothering rituals I wasn't ready to abandon. Jessica followed, her eyes widening slightly as she took in the changes to the house. The freshly painted walls, the absence of many of her photos, the pottery pieces from my class displayed on the sideboard where her academic trophies had once dominated. "You've been redecorating," she said, settling at the kitchen table, a new bistro set that had replaced the larger oak table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. "Making some changes," I corrected, setting out mugs and tea bags. "The house needed updating." She fidgeted with her engagement ring, twisting it nervously. "Ryan said he came to see you." "He did. And we had a productive conversation." I poured the boiling water into the mugs, the familiar ritual giving me time to organize my thoughts. "He seems like a good man, Jessica. Better than I gave him credit for." "He is," she said quickly. "He was really upset when I told him the whole story about the wedding and the venue. He said I was wrong to exclude you." I brought the mugs to the table, sitting across from her. "And what do you think?" She looked down at her tea, avoiding my eyes. "I think I messed up, badly." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." Her head snapped up, surprise evident in her expression. The old Sarah would have rushed to smooth things over, to minimize her culpability. The new Sarah waited, letting the uncomfortable truth hang between us. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice small. "I got caught up in everything. Victoria's approval, Ryan's family's expectations, the perfect wedding. I lost sight of what really matters." "Which is?" "You," she said immediately. "Our relationship. The fact that you've been there for me my entire life while Victoria's known me less than a year." She reached across the table, hesitantly touching my hand. "I miss you, Mom." I felt the familiar pull of her need, the gravitational force of our bond that had always drawn me back no matter how much she'd taken me for granted. But something had shifted fundamentally inside me in the weeks since our confrontation. "I miss you too, Jessica," I said honestly. "But I don't miss who I was in our relationship. I don't miss being taken for granted, being valued only for what I could provide." Her face flushed. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time you called just to check on me? Not because you needed something? When was the last time you asked about my life, my dreams, my struggles?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, realization dawning in her eyes. "I can't remember," she admitted. "Neither can I," said. "And that's the problem, Jessica. Our relationship has been one-sided for so long that we both came to accept it as normal. You expected me to sacrifice endlessly for your happiness, and I expected nothing in return." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you." "No," I said gently, "but you did hurt me, deeply. And what concerns me most is that you didn't recognize how hurtful your actions were until they affected you directly, until you lost the wedding venue you wanted." She looked away, unable to deny the truth of my words. "So where does that leave us?" she asked after a long moment. "That depends on what you want, Jessica. Not what Victoria wants, not what Ryan wants, not even what you think I want. What do you, Jessica Mitchell, truly want for our relationship moving forward?" She seemed startled by the question, as if no one had asked her to consider her own authentic desires in a long time. She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. "I want to fix this. I want you at my wedding, not just as a guest, but as the mother of the bride. I want to rebuild our relationship, but..." She paused, studying my face carefully. "Different than before, more balanced." "And what would that look like to you?" I prompted, sipping my tea. "I don't know exactly," she admitted. "But I know it starts with me acknowledging how much you've done for me, how much you've sacrificed, and it includes me supporting your new interests, your goals." She gestured around the kitchen. "This new life you're building." I nodded slowly. "It would also mean boundaries, Jessica. Clear ones that we both respect. It would mean I won't be your financial safety net anymore. I won't drop everything when you call. I won't put your needs above my own well-being." She absorbed this, eyes wide. "That sounds fair," she said finally. "Different, but fair." "It is different," I agreed. "Because I'm different now. The past few weeks have shown me that I still have value beyond being your mother. That I have dreams worth pursuing, a life worth living fully." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, tracing the rim of her mug with one finger. "I've been selfish," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All these years I've been taking and taking without giving back." "Yes," I said simply, neither accusatory nor absolving, just truthful. "Can you forgive me?" she asked, vulnerability raw in her voice. I considered her question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a one-time event, Jessica. It's a process that requires change on both sides. I'm willing to start that process, but I need to see consistent effort from you to rebuild trust." "What can I do?" The eagerness in her voice was so reminiscent of her childhood self, always wanting clear instructions, concrete steps to follow. "For starters, you can recognize that attending your wedding is my choice to make, not an obligation. If I come, it will be because I want to celebrate your happiness, not because I've been guilted or manipulated into it." She nodded quickly. "Of course, it's completely your decision. And," I continued, setting down my mug, "you need to understand that whatever relationship we rebuild will be different from what we had before. I won't be the same mother you've known all your life." A shadow of uncertainty crossed her face. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I'm prioritizing myself now in ways I never have before. I have pottery classes on Thursdays. I'm taking on new clients at work with the goal of early retirement. I'm planning a hiking trip through the Smoky Mountains this fall." Jessica's eyes widened slightly at this litany of changes. "I had no idea you were interested in any of those things." "Neither did I admitted. "I've spent so long focused exclusively on your needs and dreams that I lost touch with my own. That's not your fault, Jessica. It was my choice. But it's a choice I won't be making anymore." She nodded slowly, processing this new reality. "I want to know more about your life. she said hesitantly. About these new interests, if you're willing to share them with me. The sincere curiosity in her voice touched something in me, a cautious hope that perhaps there was a path forward for us, different but potentially more authentic than what we'd had before. I'd like that, I said, offering a small smile. But not tonight. It's been a long day, and I have an early client meeting tomorrow. She looked startled at the gentle dismissal. Another change from our old pattern where her presence would automatically supersede any needs or plans of mine. Of course, she said, standing quickly. I didn't mean to intrude. You're not intruding, I clarified. I'm just setting a boundary. We can continue this conversation another time. At the door, she hesitated, then asked, Will you think about coming to the wedding? It's in 3 weeks. I understand if you need more time to decide. I will think about it, I promised, neither committing nor refusing. Good night, Jessica. After she left, I sank onto my sofa, emotionally drained but strangely peaceful. The encounter had gone better than I'd anticipated. Jessica seemed genuinely remorseful, willing to acknowledge her role in our dysfunctional dynamic. Yet I remained cautious, aware that patterns established over decades don't change overnight. I picked up my phone and texted Karen. Jessica just left. We talked. It was hopeful, but I'm keeping my guard up. Karen's reply came immediately. Proud of you for holding your ground. Remember, actions speak louder than words. The next morning at work, Thomas stopped by my office, coffee in hand. You look better, he observed, setting a cup on my desk. More centered. Jessica came by last night, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. We had a good talk. First honest conversation we've had in years, maybe ever. And? He settled into the chair across from me. And I'm cautiously optimistic. She seemed genuinely sorry, willing to accept a new normal between us. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. That's good, Sarah. Just remember that real change takes time. Speaking of change, I said, shifting to a topic that felt safer, more within my control. I've been thinking about the Richards portfolio. I have some ideas for restructuring their retirement planning. He smiled, understanding my need to focus on work. I'm all ears. The next 2 weeks passed in a new rhythm. Jessica called every few days, brief conversations where she asked more questions about my life than she had in years. She invited me to lunch, listened with apparent interest as I described my pottery class, asked thoughtful questions about my retirement plans. Small steps, but meaningful ones. True to my word, I made no commitments about the wedding, and to her credit, Jessica didn't press for an answer. She did, however, invite me to a rescheduled dress fitting. No pressure, she assured me over the phone. I just thought you might want to see the dress, even if you decide not to come to the ceremony. I agreed, curious to see how she would handle the situation, how Victoria might react to my presence. The boutique was exactly as I'd imagined it, all creamy whites and champagne hues, plush seating, and attentive staff offering delicate flutes of sparkling water. Victoria was already there when I arrived, her surprise at seeing me poorly concealed behind a tight smile. Sarah, she said, rising to greet me with the barest minimum of politeness. How unexpected. Jessica invited me, I replied simply, taking a seat opposite her. Before Victoria could respond, Jessica emerged from the dressing room in her wedding gown, a stunning creation of silk and lace that made her look ethereal, timeless. Mom! She exclaimed, genuine pleasure lighting her face. You came! I wouldn't miss it, I said honestly, emotion tightening my throat at the sight of my daughter as a bride. Jessica twirled slowly, the dress catching the light. What do you think? You look beautiful, I said softly. Absolutely beautiful. Victoria cleared her throat. The neckline still needs adjustment. And I'm not convinced about the train. It seems excessive for the Grand Hotel's setting. I waited for Jessica to defer to Victoria's judgment as she had so many times before. Instead, she met my eyes in the mirror and smiled. "I love the train," she said firmly. "It's staying." Victoria's lips thinned, but she said nothing more. A small moment, but a revealing one. After the fitting, Jessica suggested lunch. Just the two of us. As we settled at a small cafe near the boutique, she asked hesitantly, "What did you think of Victoria today?" "She was restrained," I offered diplomatically. Jessica laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from her in too long. That's one word for it. She's trying, in her way. Ryan had a serious talk with both his parents after everything happened. He told them our relationship was at risk if they couldn't accept and respect you. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by Ryan's backbone. That must have gone over well. "About as well as you'd expect," she acknowledged. But something interesting happened afterward. Anish, Ryan's father, actually called me to apologize. He said he's been letting Victoria run, roughshod over family relationships for years, and it was time for that to stop. "That's unexpected," I said carefully. Jessica nodded, stirring her iced tea thoughtfully. "I'm starting to see some parallels that make me uncomfortable. The way Victoria dominates their family dynamic, the way Anish just goes along with whatever she wants. It reminds me a little too much of how I've treated you." The insight surprised me. That's a perceptive observation. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she admitted. "And some therapy, actually. 2 sessions so far." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't want to recreate unhealthy patterns in my marriage to Ryan. I don't want to become Victoria, and I don't want Ryan to become Anish." "That's a good place to start," I said gently. "Or you?" she added quietly. "I don't want to expect Ryan to sacrifice everything for my happiness, the way I expected you to." The honesty of her self-reflection touched me deeply. Perhaps there was hope for real change after all. As we finished lunch, Jessica handed me a small wrapped package. "This is for you. Just a little something I saw and thought you might like." Puzzled, I unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound sketchbook, its cover embossed with mountain silhouettes. "For your hiking trip," she explained, "to document your adventures." It was exactly the sort of thoughtful gift I might have chosen for myself. Practical yet personal, aligned with my newly discovered interests. For the first time in our adult relationship, Jessica had seen me clearly, not just as her mother, but as a woman with her own passions and pursuits. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. "This is perfect." Walking back to our cars, Jessica asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between us. "Have you decided about the wedding? I completely understand if you need more time." I'd been turning the decision over in my mind for days, weighing my lingering hurt against the tentative new beginning we seemed to be forging. "I'll be there," I said finally. "Not because I feel obligated, but because I want to share in your happiness." Relief and joy washed over her face. "Really? You mean it?" "Yes, but on one condition. I attend as the mother of the bride, fully acknowledged, fully included. No compromises on that point." "Absolutely," she said immediately. "That was never even a question anymore. And I'm not paying for anything else," I added firmly. "No last-minute expenses, no emergencies, no honeymoon. Funds. My presence is my gift to you." She nodded without hesitation. "That's more than fair. Ryan and I are covering everything ourselves now. We've scaled back some things to fit our actual budget, not Victoria's fantasy." "Good," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "That's a healthy start to a marriage." That evening, I drove to the Mapleton Community Art Center for my pottery class, my thoughts still circling around Jessica and our evolving relationship. Diane Reynolds noticed my distraction as I worked on a serving platter at the wheel. "Everything okay, Sarah? You seem a million miles away tonight." I smiled, bringing my focus back to the clay spinning beneath my hands. "Just processing some family developments. My daughter's wedding is in a few weeks." "Ah," she nodded knowingly. "That's always a complicated time, even in the best of relationships." "We're finding our way," I said, shaping the edges of the platter with careful precision. "It's different than it was, which is both challenging and refreshing." "Different can be good," Diane observed, watching my technique. "Like that platter you're making. It's unlike anything you've tried before, but look how beautifully it's turning out." I glanced down at my creation, seeing the truth in her words. The piece was more daring than my usual work, wider, with an undulating rim that required more confidence and skill than I'd previously attempted. "I guess I'm branching out in more ways than one," I acknowledged. After class, I checked my phone to find a text from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Anish Patel. Would you be available for coffee tomorrow? There are some matters I'd like to discuss regarding the wedding." I stared at the message, curiosity warring with caution. What could Ryan's father possibly want to discuss with me? After a moment's consideration, I texted back, 3 p.m. at the Copper Kettle would work for me." His response came immediately, "Perfect. Thank you for making time." Curious about this unexpected development, I called Karen on my way home. "Ryan's father wants to meet for coffee tomorrow. Any theories?" "Maybe Victoria's planning to kidnap you and lock you in their basement until after the wedding," Karen suggested dryly. "If I don't call you by 4 p.m., send a search party." I played along, though a small part of me remained wary. The Patels had already proven themselves capable of manipulation. "Seriously, though," Karen continued, "be careful, Sarah. You've made such progress standing up for yourself. Don't let them pull you back into their drama." "I won't," I promised. "I'm just curious what he wants." When I arrived at the Copper Kettle the next afternoon, Anish Patel was already there, dressed casually in khakis and a polo shirt, a stark contrast to the formal business attire I'd seen him wear at previous wedding planning events. He stood, as I approached, extending his hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for meeting me." "Sarah, please," I corrected, shaking his hand. "And you're welcome, though I'm curious about what warranted a private conversation." He smiled slightly, gesturing for me to sit. Direct and to the point. "I appreciate that quality, Sarah. It's refreshingly rare in our social circle." I settled across from him, waiting expectantly as he ordered coffee for us both. "I owe you an apology," he began once the server had departed. "For my role in what happened with the wedding planning, with Victoria's behavior, with how you were treated, I should have stepped in much sooner." His candor surprised me. "Thank you, but I'm curious why you're telling me this now." Anish sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Because I've watched this pattern play out for 27 years in my own marriage, and I'm only now finding the courage to address it. Victoria has always been controlling, status conscious. I've enabled it by remaining silent, by letting her dictate terms to everyone around her, including our son." "That sounds difficult," I said neutrally, unwilling to be drawn into criticizing Victoria, despite everything that had happened. "It is what it is," he said with a small shrug. "But seeing how her behavior affected you, how it nearly cost Ryan, his relationship with Jessica, it was a wake-up call. We're in counseling now, Victoria and I. It's not easy, but it's necessary." The revelation stunned me. The Patels had always projected such an image of perfect, effortless success. "I'm sorry you're going through that, but it sounds like a positive step." "It is," he agreed. "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to meet with you. Victoria and I would like to reimburse you for the deposit you paid at the Peninsula Resort." I blinked in surprise. "That's not necessary." "It is," he insisted. "It was wrong of Victoria to take credit for securing the venue when you had made the financial commitment." It was wrong of us to exclude you from the planning when you were the one actually funding it. We'd like to make that right. The deposit was non-refundable, I reminded him. The money is gone. Not from our perspective, he said, sliding an envelope across the table. We've prepared a cashier's check for the full amount. Please accept it as part of our apology. I stared at the envelope without touching it. Why now? Why not immediately after the cancellation? Anish had the grace to look uncomfortable. Frankly, Victoria was still in denial about her role in the situation. It's taken time and several difficult therapy sessions for her to recognize the harm she caused. This is her idea, actually, though she asked me to deliver the check. She's still working up to a direct apology. I considered his words, weighing the sincerity I heard in his voice against my lingering distrust. I appreciate the gesture, Anish, but I need to think about whether accepting this money is the right thing for me right now. This isn't just about finances, it's about boundaries and expectations moving forward. He nodded, seeming to respect my caution. I understand. Take all the time you need. He sipped his coffee, then added, For what it's worth, I think the changes Jessica has been making, scaling back the wedding, taking responsibility for their own finances, are positive ones. Ryan seems happier, more himself, than he has in years. I've noticed a change in Jessica too, I acknowledged. More self-aware, more considerate. Perhaps some good has come from this difficult situation after all, he offered. Perhaps, I agreed cautiously. As our coffee concluded, Anish stood to leave but paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. There's one more thing you should know. Victoria and I were planning a surprise honeymoon for Ryan and Jessica, a trip to Hawaii, staying at the Royal Palms Resort on Maui. It was meant to be our grand gesture, a way of welcoming Jessica into the family. That sounds lovely, I said, wondering why he was telling me this. We've decided not to do it, he continued. Not because we don't want to give them a wonderful honeymoon, but because Ryan specifically asked us not to. He said they want to plan their own trip, within their own means. He mentioned they're considering a weekend at a mountain cabin instead. Something simple they can afford themselves. I couldn't help but smile at this evidence of their changing priorities. That sounds like a wise decision. I think so too, Anish agreed. Though I admit, old habits die hard. It's difficult not to want to shower them with the best of everything. The best gifts aren't always the most expensive ones, I offered. Sometimes the best thing we can give our children is the space to make their own choices, their own mistakes, to build their own lives. He nodded thoughtfully. I'm beginning to understand that. Thank you for meeting with me today, Sarah. I hope we can move forward with a healthier dynamic for all our sakes. After he left, I remained at the table, staring at the envelope he'd left behind. $30,000. A sum that could make a significant difference in my retirement timeline, that could fund the extended hiking trip I'd been dreaming about, that could provide a cushion of security I hadn't enjoyed in years. Yet accepting it felt complicated. Would it reset expectations that the Patels could buy their way out of difficult situations? Would it somehow obligate me to them in the future? Or was rejecting it just another form of pride, a refusal to accept that maybe, just maybe, Victoria and Anish were genuinely trying to make amends? I finally picked up the envelope and slipped it into my purse, still undecided. This was a decision that required careful thought, perhaps discussion with Karen and Thomas. There was no need to rush. As I drove home, my phone rang through the car's speaker system. Jessica's name appeared on the dashboard display. Hey, I answered, curious about her timing given my meeting with Anish. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. Did you just meet with Ryan's dad? Yes, I confirmed cautiously. He told me they wanted to reimburse the deposit I paid at the peninsula. I had no idea they were planning to do that. she said quickly. "Ryan just told me his dad mentioned meeting you. I wanted to make sure everything was okay." "Everything's fine," I assured her. It was actually a good conversation. Surprisingly honest. She was quiet for a moment. "Did he tell you about the Hawaii honeymoon they were planning?" "He mentioned they'd decided not to do it after Ryan asked them not to." Jessica laughed, a sound caught between relief and disbelief. "That's true, but not the whole story. Ryan told them no because I said I didn't want to accept another extravagant gift with strings attached. I told him I'd rather stay in a tent for our honeymoon than be indebted to his parents for a luxury trip we couldn't afford ourselves." Pride swelled in my chest at her newfound clarity. "That must have been a difficult conversation." "Terrifying," she admitted, "but also liberating. It felt like the first time I was making a decision based on what I actually wanted rather than what I thought would impress others." "I'm proud of you," I said simply. "Thanks, Mom," she replied, her voice warming. "That means a lot." She paused, then asked hesitantly, "Are you going to accept the money from Ryan's parents?" I considered her question carefully. "I haven't decided yet. It's complicated." "For what it's worth," she offered, "I think you should take it. Not because you need their money or approval, but because they need to make concrete amends. Words are easy. Writing a check that size actually costs them something." Her insight surprised me. "When did you get so wise about human nature?" "I've had a good teacher," she said softly. "Even when I wasn't paying attention, I was learning from you, Mom." After we hung up, I drove the rest of the way home in thoughtful silence, turning over the day's revelations. The Patels attempting to make amends. Jessica asserting healthy boundaries with her future in-laws. The shifting dynamics among all of us as we approached the wedding day. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, watching the sunset paint, my small house in warm golden light. The home I'd maintained on my own for decades, sacrificing to provide Jessica with stability and opportunity. It had always been enough, even when society and the Patel's mansion made it seem inadequate. Inside, I made myself a simple dinner and ate at my new bistro table. The envelope from Anish Patel propped against the vase of fresh flowers I'd bought myself that morning. A small luxury that represented my commitment to valuing my own pleasure, my own aesthetic preferences. I was halfway through my meal when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. Opening it, I found a message from Victoria Patel. "Sarah, I understand Anish met with you today. I want to apologize in person for my behavior. Would you be willing to meet for lunch next week?" I stared at the message, wondering at the genuine shift it might represent. Was Victoria truly recognizing the harm she'd caused? Or was this another manipulation? Only time would tell. But I was no longer the same woman who had allowed herself to be marginalized and dismissed for the sake of keeping peace. "Tuesday at noon would work for me," I replied, neither eager nor reluctant. Simply open to the possibility that people could change, that relationships could heal, that new beginnings were possible even in the most painful circumstances. Setting down my phone, I returned to my dinner, savoring each bite with the quiet contentment of a woman who had lost much but gained something perhaps more valuable, a clear understanding of her own worth, independent of anyone else's validation or approval. My lunch with Victoria Patel was scheduled at Bella Vista, an upscale Italian restaurant overlooking Mapleton's Central Park. I arrived exactly on time, not early, as had been my habit in the past when meeting members of the Patel family, a small assertion of my newly established boundaries. Victoria was already seated, of course, at a corner table partially screened by an ornamental ficus. She rose as I approached, her designer outfit and perfect makeup creating the polished armor she always wore like a second skin. "Sarah," she greeted me, extending her hand rather than attempting the air kiss I'd seen her bestow on her social circle. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Victoria," I replied with a civil nod, accepting her handshake before taking my seat. I was surprised by your invitation. A flicker of something, discomfort perhaps, or genuine remorse, crossed her face before her social mask settled back into place. I imagine you were. I haven't given you many reasons to think well of me. The candid acknowledgement caught me off guard. I said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch between us as the server approached to take our drink orders. Victoria requested sparkling water. I chose iced tea, deliberately avoiding the wine she might have expected. Once we were alone again, Victoria straightened her silverware in a gesture that betrayed her nervousness despite her composed exterior. I owe you an apology, Sarah, a significant one. Yes, I agreed simply. You do. Her eyes widened slightly at my directness before a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. Anish mentioned you don't mince words. I find that refreshing, actually. There's so much performance in my social circle, so many layers of polite fiction. I don't have time for games anymore, I told her. If you asked me here to apologize, I'm listening. Victoria took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring as if bracing for an unpleasant task. You're right. I behaved abominably toward you during the wedding planning, taking credit for the venue you paid for, systematically excluding you from decisions, suggesting to Jessica that your presence would somehow diminish the event. She met my eyes directly. It was elitist, cruel, and utterly indefensible. The comprehensive nature of her apology surprised me. I'd expected equivocation, partial admissions cushioned by justifications. Why? I asked simply. Why was it so important to push me aside? Victoria's gaze dropped to her water glass. The easy answer is that I'm a controlling person who needs things done my way. That's what I've been telling myself for years, that my exacting standards are about quality, about creating the perfect experience. She looked up again, her expression more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it. But our therapist has helped me recognize a harder truth. I do these things because I'm deeply insecure. Our drinks arrived, giving us both a moment to regroup. I sipped my tea, processing her admission. When the server departed, I prompted, "Insecure about what?" "About my place in the world," she said quietly. "About my value beyond the perfect hostess, the social connector, the woman who knows everyone worth knowing." When Jessica entered our lives, so bright and accomplished and from such a different background than ours, I felt threatened. By Jessica? I asked, confused. By you, she clarified. By the relationship you had with her. The way she spoke. About you. This single mother who'd sacrificed everything to give her daughter opportunities, who'd built a career and a home on her own. You represented an authenticity I've never had, a kind of strength I've never developed. So I did what insecure people do. I tried to diminish you, to prove my way was superior. I sat back, genuinely stunned by her self-awareness. That's surprisingly insightful. A dry laugh escaped her. 12 sessions of twice-weekly therapy will do that to you. Particularly when your husband finally stands up and says he won't continue living this way. Anish mentioned you were in counseling. I acknowledged. That must be challenging. Excruciating, she admitted. But necessary. For our marriage, for my relationship with Ryan, and... She hesitated. Hopefully for a potential relationship with Jessica, one based on mutual respect rather than control. I studied her carefully, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown to expect. Instead, I saw a woman in her 60s finally confronting uncomfortable truths about herself. It wasn't my place to absolve her, but I could acknowledge her effort. Thank you for your honesty, I said finally. It can't have been easy to admit these things. It wasn't, she agreed. But it's even harder to face the damage I've caused. Ryan nearly called off the wedding because of my behavior. My husband of 36 years is considering whether our marriage can be saved. and a young woman I could have welcomed as a daughter was made to feel inadequate and unworthy. She shook her head sadly, all because I couldn't face my own insecurities. As our lunch progressed, Victoria continued to surprise me with her candor. She spoke of her own upbringing in a status-obsessed family, her struggle to live up to impossible standards, her fear that without perfect control, she would be revealed as somehow fraudulent. None of it excused her behavior, but it helped me understand it. "Have you spoken to Jessica about any of this?" I asked as we finished our meals. Victoria nodded. "Last week. It was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had. She was gracious, more gracious than I deserved. She's finding her own strength these days," I observed. "She is," Victoria agreed. "And I suspect much of that comes from your example, even if the lesson took longer to sink in than it should have." As the server cleared our plates, Victoria reached into her handbag and removed an envelope similar to the one Anish had presented to me. "I understand my husband offered to reimburse your deposit at the peninsula." "He did," I confirmed. "I haven't decided whether to accept it." "May I ask why? It's clearly owed to you." I considered my answer carefully. "Because money has always been a complicated element in my relationship with Jessica. I've given financially to the point of my own detriment, created patterns where my value was tied to what I could provide. Accepting this feels like it might reinforce those patterns somehow." Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand that concern. But may I offer a different perspective? This isn't Jessica asking you for money. This is Anish and me acknowledging a debt, a literal financial debt, but also a moral one. Your accepting it doesn't continue an unhealthy pattern. It holds us accountable for our actions." Her framing resonated with me in a way Anish's hadn't. This wasn't about charity or even restitution. It was about accountability. "I'll think about what you've said," I told her as we prepared to leave. At the door, Victoria turned to face me directly. "I don't expect us to become friends, Sarah. Too much has happened for that. But I do hope we can establish a civil relationship for the sake of our children. And I want you to know that I genuinely regret how I treated you." "I appreciate that," I said honestly. "And I think a civil relationship is a reasonable goal." She smiled slightly. "You'll be at the wedding?" "Yes," I confirmed, as mother of the bride. "As you should be," she acknowledged. "Jessica is lucky to have you." As I drove back to the office, I reflected on the unexpected turn the day had taken. Victoria Patel, the woman who had orchestrated my exclusion from my daughter's wedding, was now acknowledging her wrongdoing and actively working to change her behavior. If someone so seemingly rigid could recognize her flaws and attempt to grow, beyond them, perhaps there was hope for all of us. That evening, as I was preparing for my pottery class, my phone rang with a call from Thomas. "How was lunch with the dragon lady?" he asked without preamble. I smiled at his protective tone. Surprisingly enlightening. She offered what seemed to be a genuine apology. "And you believe her?" Skepticism dripped from every word. "I'm reserving judgment," I replied. But she showed more self-awareness than I would have thought possible. "She's in intensive therapy, apparently." He said, unconvinced. "Well, keep your guard up. People like that don't change overnight." "True," I agreed. "But they can start the process of changing. Speaking of which, how are you feeling about our presentation to the board next week? I've made some revisions to the projections you might want to review." Thomas chuckled at my transparent attempt to change the subject. "Send them over. I'll look at them tonight." He paused, then added more seriously, "You know I'm proud of you, right? The way you've handled this whole situation with Jessica and the Patels." The old Sarah would have capitulated at the first sign of tension, paid for everything, and accepted being sidelined. His words warmed me. "Thank you. Sometimes I hardly recognize myself these days, in a good way." "Well, I like this version of Sarah Mitchell," he said firmly. She's someone I'd like to take to dinner sometime, if she's interested. The offer hung in the air between us, unexpected but not unwelcome. Thomas had been divorced for nearly a decade, and we'd developed a close friendship over the years, but he'd never before suggested anything beyond our professional relationship. "I think she might be," I heard myself saying. "After the board presentation next week, perhaps?" "It's a date," he said, the smile evident in his voice. "Now go play with clay and stop worrying about Victoria Patel." At pottery class, I found myself creating with a newfound confidence, trying techniques I'd previously considered beyond my skill level. Diane noticed the change immediately. "Someone's feeling adventurous tonight," she observed, watching me attempt a challenging handle attachment on a teapot. "What's inspired this bold new approach?" I smiled, carefully smoothing the join. "Let's just say I'm discovering that people, including me, are capable of more growth than I previously thought." "Possible." "That's a powerful realization," she nodded approvingly. "It's showing in your work. You're not second-guessing yourself as much." Later, as I carefully wrapped my teapot for transport home, Diane mentioned the upcoming community art fair. "You should enter some of your pieces, Sarah. They're certainly good enough." The suggestion would have terrified me 2 months ago. The idea of publicly displaying my amateur efforts, inviting judgment and comparison. Now I found myself considering it seriously. "Maybe I will," I said, surprising myself. "The blue serving platter, perhaps, and this teapot if it survives firing." Diane beamed at me. "Excellent. I'll get you the registration forms next week." On my drive home, Jessica called. "How was lunch with Victoria?" she asked anxiously. "Ryan's been on edge all afternoon waiting to hear how it went." "It was illuminating," I said, choosing my words carefully. "She seems to be doing some genuine self-reflection." "So it wasn't awful?" The relief in Jessica's voice was palpable. "Not awful at all," I assured her. "We had a civil conversation. She apologized quite thoroughly, actually." "Thank God," Jessica breathed. "Ryan's been so worried. He feels caught in the middle of all this." "He doesn't need to be," I told her. "Victoria and I are both adults. We can manage a functional relationship for your sakes." "That's what I keep telling him," she agreed. "But you know how he is. He wants everyone to get along perfectly." I smiled at this insight into my future son-in-law's character. "Perfect is overrated. Functional and respectful will do just fine." Jessica laughed, a carefree sound I hadn't heard from her in far too long. Speaking of functional, Ryan and I finalized our honeymoon plans today. We're renting a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 4 days after the wedding. Nothing fancy, but it has a hot tub and hiking trails nearby. "That sounds lovely," I said sincerely, warmed by this evidence of their shifting priorities. "Sometimes the simplest experiences are the most meaningful." "That's what we thought," she agreed. "And it means we'll start our marriage on solid financial footing instead of with credit card debt from a trip we couldn't afford." Pride swelled in my chest at her mature perspective. "You've come a long way these past few weeks, Jessica." "I had a good teacher," she said softly. "It just took me too long to pay attention to the lessons." After we hung up, I found myself smiling as I pulled into my driveway. The evening stretched before me, quiet, peaceful, mine to fill as I chose. I decided to take advantage of the mild spring weather by sitting on my small back patio with a glass of wine and the pottery magazine I'd been meaning to read. As darkness fell, I scrolled through my phone, looking at photos from my recent hike with Karen. We'd explored a local nature preserve, nothing strenuous, but it had awakened my desire for more ambitious adventures. On impulse, I searched for information about guided hiking trips in the Smoky Mountains. A 7-day trek caught my eye, described as moderate difficulty with comfortable lodge accommodations each night. the perfect balance of challenge and comfort for a novice solo traveler. The dates in September would work with my schedule, especially if I moved client meetings around. The cost was significant but manageable, particularly if I accepted the Patel's reimbursement. Before I could overthink it, I entered my credit card information and booked the trip. As the confirmation email arrived in my inbox, a thrill of excitement and trepidation coursed through me. I, Sarah Mitchell, was going on a solo adventure. Not for Jessica, not for anyone else, just for me. The next morning, I stopped by the bank and deposited Anish's check, mentally allocating the funds between my retirement account and a dedicated travel fund for future adventures. Victoria had been right. Accepting the money wasn't about continuing unhealthy patterns, but about acknowledging accountability and closing that chapter appropriately. When I arrived at the office, a delivery was waiting on my desk. A beautiful orchid plant with a simple card. Looking forward to dinner. Thomas. The gesture brought a smile to my face and a flutter to my stomach that I hadn't felt in decades. At 54, I was experiencing the nervous excitement of a new potential relationship. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Karen called during my lunch break. Anish Patel's check cleared, she stated without preamble. I just got the notification from the bank. You actually deposited it. I did, I confirmed. It felt like the right thing to do. Well, she said, her tone a mix of surprise and approval. Sarah Mitchell accepting money from someone else instead of giving it away. Will wonders never cease? I laughed at her teasing. I'm evolving, apparently. Speaking of which, I booked that Smoky Mountains hiking trip. You're kidding. Her excitement warmed me. The 7-day one you were looking at? By yourself? Yes to both, I confirmed. September 12th to 19th. I'm terrified and thrilled at the same time. I'm so proud of you, she said warmly. My little sister, the independent adventurer. Don't get carried away, I cautioned. It's a guided tour with nice lodges, not a solo wilderness expedition. Still, she insisted. 6 months ago, you wouldn't have considered a week away from home doing something just for your own enjoyment. It's a big step. She was right, of course. My world had been so narrowly focused on work and Jessica that the concept of personal pleasure had become almost foreign to me. Now, I was rediscovering the joy of self-directed choices, pottery classes, hiking trips, dinner dates. The 2 weeks leading up to Jessica's wedding passed in a blur of activity. Our presentation to the board was a resounding success, with Thomas and I securing approval for our proposed expansion into sustainable investment advising. Our celebration dinner afterward stretched late into the evening, conversation flowing effortlessly from professional topics to personal histories to cautious explorations of what might develop between us. I've enjoyed watching you come into your own these past few months, Thomas told me over dessert, his eyes warm with admiration. It's like watching someone shed a restricting garment they've worn so long they forgot it wasn't their skin. The metaphor struck me as surprisingly apt. That's exactly how it feels, I acknowledged. Scary and liberating at the same time. He covered my hand with his. Well, I like this version of Sarah a lot. She seems to know what she wants. She's figuring it out, I said with a smile. Day by day. The wedding rehearsal dinner arrived on a perfect early summer evening. Jessica had opted for a casual affair at the Garden Terrace, a local restaurant with a beautiful outdoor patio. I'd offered to contribute financially, a genuine offer with clear boundaries, not an automatic assumption. But Jessica had declined politely. We've got it covered, Mom, she'd assured me. We scaled back to what we can actually afford. The dinner reflected this new philosophy, elegant but understated, with meaningful touches rather than extravagant displays. Jessica had personally created the centerpieces, Simple arrangements of wildflowers in blue ceramic vases she'd made during pottery classes she'd started taking at my recommendation. I arrived early, feeling surprisingly calm. The Sarah of 6 months ago would have been a nervous wreck, obsessively checking details, trying to anticipate and solve problems before they arose. The new Sarah understood that the evening wasn't her responsibility. My only job was to be present, to celebrate my daughter's happiness. Victoria and Anish arrived shortly after I did. There was an awkward moment as we regarded each other across the patio, uncertain of the appropriate greeting given our complicated history. Then Victoria straightened her shoulders and approached, Anish following a step behind. "Sarah," she said simply, extending her hand. "You look lovely." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the handshake. "The venue is beautiful, isn't it? Jessica made a wonderful choice." "She did," Victoria agreed, glancing around at the twinkling lights and flowered trellises. "It's perfect in its simplicity." The exchange was hardly warm, but it was civil, a foundation we could build upon for our children's sakes. As more guests arrived, I found myself unexpectedly emotional watching Jessica move among them, radiant with happiness, her hand often seeking Ryan's as if to anchor herself in the joy of the moment. My little girl was getting married tomorrow. Despite everything that had happened, despite the painful growth we'd both experienced, that fundamental truth remained a source of bittersweet wonder. After dinner, Ryan's best man stood to offer the first toast. Others followed: childhood friends, college roommates, colleagues. Then Jessica stood, champagne flute in hand, and the room quieted. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion shining in her eyes. "Tomorrow, Ryan and I start a new chapter together, and we're so grateful to have you all as part of our story." She paused, her gaze finding mine. "But there's one person I need to acknowledge specially tonight. My mother, Sarah Mitchell." A lump formed in my throat as Jessica continued. "Most of you know that Mom and I went through a rough patch during the wedding planning. What you may not know is that it was entirely my fault." She smiled ruefully at the murmurs of protest. "No, really. I lost sight of what matters, who matters, in trying to create some perfect image of a society wedding." She turned to face me directly. "Mom, you have been my rock, my champion, my safety net for 24 years. You sacrificed your own dreams to give me every opportunity. You worked impossible hours to put me through college. You never once complained when I took you for granted." Her voice caught. "And when I hurt you deeply, you had the courage to hold me accountable, to show me through your actions rather than just words that relationships require mutual respect and consideration." Tears welled in my eyes as she raised her glass. "So tonight, I want to toast the strongest woman I know, my mother, who taught me what real love looks like. Not endless giving until you're empty, but honest boundaries that allow both people to grow. Thank you, Mom. I love you." The room echoed with "to Sarah" as glasses were raised. Through my tears, I saw Victoria dab at her eyes, Anish's arm supporting her shoulders. Thomas, whom I'd invited as my +1, squeezed my hand under the table. Karen beamed at me from across the room. As the evening wound down, Jessica found me on the patio, gazing up at the stars. "Hey," she said softly, slipping her arm through mine. "You okay? You've been quiet tonight." "I'm wonderful," I assured her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just taking it all in. You're getting married tomorrow." "I know," she whispered, excitement and nerves evident in her voice. "It doesn't feel quite real yet." "It will," I promised. "When you're standing there looking at Ryan, everything else will fade away." She rested her head on my shoulder, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that my heart constricted with love. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what, sweetheart?" "For not giving up on me, for showing me a better way to be, even when I was at my worst, for loving me enough to let me face the consequences of my actions. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. That's what real love is, Jessica. Not protecting someone from all pain, but supporting them through the growth that pain can bring. We stood there together in the gentle evening breeze, mother and daughter on the precipice of a new chapter in both our lives. Tomorrow she would become a wife, taking her first steps into a future of her own making, and I would continue my journey of rediscovery, building a life rich with purpose and pleasure beyond the bounds of motherhood. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt not just acceptance of these changes, but genuine excitement for what lay ahead, for both of us. The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early summer day that seemed crafted specifically for new beginnings. I woke early, the soft light filtering through my curtains. As I lay quietly, allowing myself to feel the full spectrum of emotions this day would bring, pride in the woman my daughter had become, especially in these recent months of growth and self-awareness, joy at her happiness with Ryan, a partnership that now seemed built on mutual respect rather than social climbing, nostalgia for the little girl with scraped knees and determined eyes who had once been my whole world, and a touch of wistfulness for the era of my life that was truly ending today. But unlike the anxiety and fraught emotions I might have expected, there was also a pervasive sense of peace. Jessica and I had found our way to a healthier relationship. I had reclaimed vital parts of myself that had been submerged beneath years of self-sacrifice. Whatever came next, we were both moving forward with greater wisdom and clearer boundaries. I rose and prepared for the day with deliberate care, taking time to enjoy my morning coffee on the patio, watching birds flit among the flowering shrubs I'd planted in recent weeks. My phone remained blessedly silent. No last-minute crises. No desperate calls for help or funds. Jessica and Ryan had everything under control. At 10 o'clock, I arrived at the Grand Hotel where Jessica had booked a spacious suite for wedding preparations. Her bridesmaids were already there, music playing, softly as makeup and hairstylists worked their magic. Jessica saw me in the doorway and her face lit up, breaking away from the activity to embrace me. "You're here," she said, squeezing me tightly. "Of course I am," I replied, returning her hug. "Where else would I be on your wedding day?" She pulled back, studying my face with a tender smile. "You look beautiful, Mom. That color is perfect on you." I smoothed the fabric of my sage green dress. A new purchase, more elegant and flattering than anything I would have chosen 6 months ago. "Thank you. Karen helped me pick it out." Aunt Karen has surprisingly good taste for someone who lives in sweatpants, Jessica laughed, leading me into the suite where a makeup artist was waiting for me. As I settled into the chair, Jessica pressed a small velvet box into my hand. "This is for you. A thank you for, well, everything." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a mountain charm dangling beside a small ceramic bead, glazed in the same blue as my pottery pieces. The thoughtfulness of it, acknowledging both my newly discovered passion for hiking and my creative pursuits, brought tears to my eyes. "It's perfect," I whispered, touching the charms gently. "Thank you." Jessica fastened it around my wrist, her fingers lingering for a moment. "I wanted you to have a reminder that I see you now, Mom. Not just as my mother, but as Sarah, with your own dreams and interests and needs." The simple acknowledgement meant more than any extravagant gift could have. For so long, I had existed in Jessica's life primarily as a function, provider, supporter, problem solver, rather than as a complete person with my own interior landscape. Her recognition of the full human being behind the role of mom was perhaps the most healing gift she could have offered. The morning passed in a swirl of activity. Makeup applied, hair styled, final adjustments to Jessica's gown. Through it all, I noticed a significant change from typical pre-wedding scenarios. Jessica repeatedly checked that everyone else was comfortable, that her bridesmaids felt good in their dresses, that I had everything I needed. Her newfound consideration extended beyond herself, a quiet but meaningful shift from the self-centered focus of months past. Victoria appeared briefly to deliver a small package for Ryan, her manner reserved but civil. To my surprise, she approached me as she was leaving. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I wanted to say again how lovely you look, and—" She hesitated, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her elegant suit. "I'm glad Jessica has you here with her today. It's as it should be." "Thank you, Victoria," I replied, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "I'm sure Ryan appreciates your support as well." She nodded, a ghost of a smile flickering across her face before she departed. It wasn't friendship, but it was progress, a mutual recognition that we could share space in our children's lives without conflict. As the ceremony time approached, Jessica asked for a few minutes alone with me. The bridesmaids tactfully withdrew to the adjoining room, leaving us in a pocket of quiet amid the day's excitement. "Nervous?" I asked, adjusting her veil. "Not about marrying Ryan," she said confidently. "But I am worried about everything that comes after. Being a good partner, balancing career and marriage, navigating family dynamics." She gave me a meaningful look. "Not repeating patterns that hurt the people I love." "You're already showing that you can do things differently," I assured her. "The awareness you've developed these past few months is half the battle." "I've been thinking about what happens in a year or two when we start talking about children," she admitted. "I'm terrified of becoming the kind of mother who lives through her kids or puts too much pressure on them." "The fact that you're worried about it means you're already ahead of the game," I told her. "And I'll be here to lovingly point it out if I see you heading down that path." She laughed, then grew serious again. "I want you to know something, Mom. Whatever happens in the future, if we have children, when we build our careers, I'm not going to take advantage of you again. I'm not going to expect you to drop everything or empty your bank account to solve our problems." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely touched by her commitment, "though I hope you know I'll always be here to support you in healthy ways." "I know," she nodded, "but your life doesn't revolve around mine anymore, and that's good. I want you to keep exploring, keep growing, keep going on adventures and making beautiful pottery and—" she smiled slyly, "seeing where things go with Thomas." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "You noticed that, did you?" "Mom, everyone noticed. He couldn't take his eyes off you at the rehearsal dinner." Before I could formulate a response, a knock at the door signaled it was time. Jessica took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders with a confidence I'd never quite seen in her before. "Ready?" I asked, offering my arm. "Ready," she confirmed, slipping her hand into the crook of my elbow. We had discussed this moment weeks ago. Who would walk her down the aisle in the absence of her father? Jessica had initially suggested Anish as a traditional father figure, but later reconsidered. "That you've been both mother and father to me," she'd said firmly. "If anyone walks me down that aisle, it should be you." Now, as we made our way toward the ceremony space, I felt the significance of her choice, not as a last-minute consolation after weeks of exclusion, but as a deliberate honoring of our relationship and my role in her life. The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. No elaborate florals or excessive pageantry, just heartfelt vows exchanged beneath an arch of wildflowers with the people who truly mattered as witnesses. When the minister invited Ryan and Jessica to share their personally written vows, I noticed Victoria dab at her eyes from her seat in the front row. Anish's arm slipped around her shoulders, his expression soft with tenderness. "I promise to build our life together on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine partnership," Jessica said, her voice strong and clear. "To value your dreams as much as my own. To create a home where we both can grow without limiting each other." As she spoke these words, her eyes briefly found mine in the audience. an acknowledgement of the lessons learned, the growth she'd undergone, to reach this understanding of what a healthy relationship required. At the reception, I found myself seated at the head table, not as an afterthought or obligation, but as the honored mother of the bride. Thomas, handsome in his charcoal suit, was attentive beside me, his quiet wit and genuine interest in my thoughts, a reminder of how different it felt to be truly seen and valued. After dinner came dancing, Jessica and Ryan taking the floor first for a sweet, simple first dance. Then Ryan escorted Victoria onto the floor while Jessica approached our table, extending her hand to me. "May I have this dance, Mom?" Surprised and touched, I joined her on the dance floor as the band played a soft melody that had been a favorite of mine when Jessica was small. We moved together easily, reminiscent of the times I'd taught her to dance by having her stand on my feet in our living room. "Thank you," she said softly as we swayed to the music. "For what, sweetheart?" "For giving me the space to make mistakes," she replied. "For loving me enough to let me fall and find my own way back up." "That's the hardest part of being a mother," I admitted. "Knowing when to step back, even when every instinct screams to protect." "Well, you got it right," she said, resting her head briefly on my shoulder. Even if it took me too long to realize it. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing more than participating, watching Jessica and Ryan move among their guests with genuine warmth and attention. They seemed present in a way they hadn't been during the fraught months of planning, less concerned with appearances and more focused on meaningful connections. 6 months after the wedding, I received a postcard from Hawaii, the clear blue waters of Maui captured in perfect photographic detail. "Thinking of you from paradise, Jessica," had written. Ryan surprised me with this trip for our 6-month anniversary. We saved for it ourselves. No Victoria interference, promise. Missing you and can't wait to hear about your hiking adventure when we're back. Love you, Mom. I smiled, tracing my fingers over her familiar handwriting. True to her word, Jessica had maintained our healthier boundaries, calling regularly, but never with financial emergencies or expectations that I would drop everything for her needs. We'd developed a new rhythm: Sunday phone calls, monthly dinners, occasional text messages sharing small joys or frustrations, a relationship between adults rather than the unbalanced dependency of before. As for me, I was preparing for my second major hiking trip, this time to the Grand Canyon with a small group I'd met during my Smoky Mountains adventure. My pottery pieces had sold surprisingly well at the community art fair, well enough that I'd rented space at a local studio to expand. My creative pursuits? And Thomas and I had settled into a comfortable relationship, neither rushing nor holding back, simply enjoying the discovery of each other at our own pace. When my phone rang that evening, I expected it to be Thomas confirming our dinner plans. Instead, it was Victoria Patel, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Sarah, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I replied, curious about this unexpected call. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," she assured me. "I was actually calling to ask your advice." "My advice?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. "Anish and I are planning a family dinner next month, our anniversary. Actually, I wanted to make sure it didn't conflict with your plans with the children." The thoughtfulness of the gesture, her recognition that Jessica and Ryan's time was valuable and should be shared equitably between our families, touched me deeply. "That's very considerate, Victoria. They're joining me for dinner on the 15th, but otherwise I'm not aware of any conflicts." "Perfect," she said, relief evident in her tone. "The 22nd should work then." She paused, then added more tentatively, "I was also wondering if you might have recommendations for a personal gift for Jessica. Something meaningful rather than expensive. You seem to understand that balance better than I do." I smiled at the irony of Victoria Patel, the woman who had once dismissed me as unsophisticated and unworthy, now seeking my counsel on meaningful giving. Growth was possible for all of us, it seemed. She mentioned wanting to take a pottery class, I suggested. Perhaps a gift certificate for that? Something that values her interests rather than trying to shape them. That's perfect, Victoria said warmly. Thank you, Sarah. After we ended the call, I stepped out onto my patio to watch the sunset. The evening was cool, the first hints of autumn touching the leaves of my oak tree. In the distance, I could see the mountains where I'd soon be hiking, a challenge I was fit for, prepared for, excited to embrace. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Still on for dinner? Found a new Thai place I think you'll love. I smiled as I typed back, looking forward to it. Pick me up at 7. As I settled into a patio chair to enjoy the remaining daylight, I reflected on the journey of the past year, the painful break with Jessica, the confrontation with Victoria, the wrenching but necessary reclamation of my own identity, the rebuilding of relationships on healthier foundations. It hadn't been easy. Growth rarely is. But sitting here now, financially secure, creatively fulfilled, genuinely excited about my future, I knew with absolute certainty that it had been worth it. The woman I had rediscovered beneath decades of self-sacrifice was vibrant, capable, and worthy of the same care and consideration I had always offered others. 3 years ago, I never could have imagined finding Jessica and Ryan in Hawaii on social media, their carefree smiles a stark contrast to my own lonely existence. I certainly couldn't have imagined sending a simple text, "Glad to see Victoria, made a miraculous recovery," that would set in motion such profound changes for all of us. But life has a way of offering second chances when we're brave enough to recognize them. For Jessica and me, that second chance came through painful honesty and the courage to establish new patterns. For Victoria and Anish, it came through the shock of nearly losing their son's respect. For Thomas and me, it came in the quiet recognition of shared values and mutual admiration. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had led me here, even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. For it was in those moments of greatest hurt that I had finally remembered how to stand firm in my own worth, how to love without losing myself, how to build a life that honored all of who I was: mother, friend, professional, artist, adventurer, woman, whole and complete, exactly as I am. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.